I wanted to follow up with Professor Deslaus because in our life certain people influence us a lot. So I want her to recount some of her associations with Enrico Fermi. A lot of us know Enrico Fermi as the father of nuclear reactors and things like that, and also
many other things.
Many other things. So please.
Well, I met him in graduate school, and we only overlapped for 1 year because at the end of that year he suddenly became very ill, and he passed away at age 54, which is nowadays considered a very young age for middle career, pretty much. But he left a huge legacy with so much of physics that bears his name. And there are a few things about him. He was pretty much self-taught. So he grew up in Italy, and when he was in high school, he was already writing research papers, but he didn't have, they weren't mostly published, but when you go into the, when you're in Pisa, very close to the leaning tower of Pisa, there's a small museum. It's about less than 5 minutes walk. For people out there who walk slowly like me, you'll find this museum. And there's a book that contains his notes from high school. And in the notes, he proves theorems, because he was doing mathematics, he was doing physics, he was doing all kinds of things. And of course you have to read Italian, but Italian isn't that far from English, so you can pretty much figure out some of the things. And they have the book open to some interesting pages. It's worth the trip. So now, in terms of women in science, he was a person that believed that everybody could learn a science. He was self-taught, so he figured that everybody could and should be self-taught, you know. And he ended every one of his classes with a simple-sounding problem, like why is the sky blue or something like that. A very simple thing. But once you got into working with it, it was very deep, and you learned a great deal. So of the many teachers that I ever had, he was the most brilliant and inspiring. And at MIT, we have quite a few people that studied with him. But I was almost the last person of the age, the youngest of the people that we have here that were students of his. You know. Teachers are very important.
Let me ask the same question to Johan. In your career, who were your influencers? Because I do see your dedication to workforce development and education in general, and to do a public service is not very easy, and it's a lot of politics, a lot of struggles. So I'm sure you had certain role models. So let me turn it over to you.
Well, I definitely have a couple of role models right now. I think the President and Secretary Duncan are two people that inspire me almost on a daily basis. So, but I think in terms of my career commitment, I would say that my role models were very non-traditional role models. After high school, I didn't really know what to do next, so my father said, "That's fine, go to work." So that's what I did for a while, and I learned a lot in the workplace. I was a machine operator at a chemical plant, and a lot of the people I worked with were unskilled laborers. And there was all kinds of commotion each time we got our pay every week, and I didn't understand it. So after a while, I said, okay, I'm going to figure out why there's always this arguing going on when we get our envelope with our pay in it. And it's because they couldn't figure out whether it was right or not. They actually could not do the math. They could not read what it actually said. And that was like one experience And there have been others, but that was like one experience that sort of defined what my interests were. And those, I often think about these, my coworkers in that job when I think about what the next key set of policies is that we should pursue to get to the equity agenda ultimately.
Good.
I'd like to comment on something that you said. I also had very tough jobs. I started work at 13 years of age. I was below the age of getting a real work permit, which I think in the U.S. is 14. But I would say that when you have these unskilled jobs, you're treated very differently than when you have a skilled job. And if you work for a small period of time in those circumstances, you really appreciate education and putting effort into improving your own level of being.
So now let's turn our attention a little bit about the social barriers for female participation in science and engineering, because we know that there are a lot of these social stereotypes, and we still see that the difference in the pay scales of the male and female employees while they may be doing the same job. So I want to get panel's view on what are those social barriers, and if you have encountered them, then how you would get over those social barriers. Let me start with your hand first.
Well, I don't know if I can add a lot to the fact that I acknowledge that these barriers are real. And I think a lot of them tie into biases and traditions that are in people's minds, and therefore result in a number of decisions that parents or caregivers may make that on an ongoing basis seem to almost function like a funnel from an opportunity perspective. Like if you started out with a lot, if you encounter a number of these stereotypes or biases along the way, you may get exposed to fewer opportunities, and then you're sort of down this path. I mean,
Well, I think that you're correct, but you know, we should. The law is equal work, equal pay, so that's the law, and I think that's a very good rule, and it's fair, and in the fields that we work in here, which are quantitative, you can evaluate what the accomplishment is, at least at some level. If you come up with a new idea that's really new, that goes against everything that people are currently doing, it takes about 10 years until people understand what you're talking about. So when you're changing something in a major way, that takes a long time. But the daily kinds of things that we encounter, it should be equal. There's no way of evaluating something that's really a game changer, because we don't know how important it is until enough people understand the meaning of it.
Good. Last question. So we have put a picture here where we want Professor Dresselhaus to explain one of her theories.
Yeah, I was Googling all that I needed to, both of you, and I came across some interesting pictures. Can you speak to that? And I have a picture for you as well. You're allowed to speak to either one or both, and I know what they are, but I think audience members would love this.
Well, the top picture is me with a model of a carbon nanotube. Now, a carbon nanotube is a very tiny object. The diameter that you see there, that's as large as my face, is in actuality, the thing I'm holding up that's a model, is 1 nanometer. So how much is a nanometer? Well, a meter is this much, and 1 billion times 10 to the 9th times smaller is the size of that. So I don't know if you could imagine 10 to the 9th times smaller, but it's a very huge amount. So that's what the atoms are doing. And at that scale, what the whole point, the science of it is, at that scale, the atoms behave very differently than they behave when they're in a collective mode. And we have many, many, like Avogadro's number of atoms. So when you have very small size objects, quantum mechanics govern, and the laws of physics are somewhat different in that limit. And so that's the kind of stuff I work with. So that's that picture. And so the apropos point I want to say is that we wrote a paper about this thing in 1992. And it took about 10 years for people to understand that paper. And because it made a prediction that was sort of counterintuitive. That if you see those atoms and they're arranged in a hexagon, if you look at a certain angle, you'll see a hexagon. It's not very important. But the angle between those hexagons and the axis of that cylinder determines whether electricity is conducted down that cylinder or not, whether it's an insulator or a conductor. So that's a very, very different phenomenon, but it has to do with this geometry of the placement of the atoms. So that was the theory, and we wrote this theoretical paper, and nobody believed it. But the experiments were done in different countries around the world. You know, this is international science, and so the model is right, and that was sort of the early work on nanoscience.
The second picture that you have.
Oh, the second picture is the Copley Prize from the king of, the king has just handed me, the king of Norway just handed me that little thing in my hand. That's $1 million. Basically.
So
now we have one for you.
So you know what Google can do to you. It will be out there.
Dr. Johan, if you may explain to the audience as to what is happening here, it's very inspiring.
Sure. So every year, the secretary and a few of the members of the team do a back-to-school bus tour, and it is always intended to highlight some of the initiatives or policies that we want to emphasize in a given year. And it's an opportunity to really visit with practitioners at the local level who are doing extraordinary work that illustrates what we would like to see happen at scale. Here we are, let me see, at a high school in, I think it's in Tennessee. And they had just received some resources from the federal government to rethink the way they organize their high school. And they were trying to do it so that they would have career pathways that would start in 9th grade and had a work-based learning component to it that had dual enrollment and dual credit provisions embedded in it, so that while the kids were in high school, they were actually already getting college credit for the courses that they were taking. So, and we're visiting here with some of the students, and that's always the most exciting part of these visits. So and you can tell that I obviously was quite inspired by what they were doing and saying.
So at this point, I think I will open it for the audience for any questions that you may have. So that now I know this is Friday and it's getting about 5:16. So let's keep it to another 20-25 minutes. We can have a session for the open discussion.